11 board members fired single dad vet on Zoom, but before he could even hug his crying daughter, black cars pulled up, Secret Service stormed the house, and the truth they revealed shattered everything. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The first rays of sunlight crept through the kitchen window as Jackson Cole stood at the stove, spatula in hand. The sizzle of eggs filled the morning air, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. His movements were precise and methodical, a habit ingrained from years of military service that hadn't faded even after 12 years of civilian life. The kitchen, like everything else in their modest home, reflected Jackson's orderly nature. Dishes were stacked neatly in the cupboards, spice jars lined up with military precision, and the countertops gleamed spotlessly clean. Near the door, his black work boots sat perfectly aligned, their polished surface catching the early morning light. "Dad, are you making your famous Army breakfast again?" Emily's voice carried down the hallway, followed by the sound of her sock-covered feet padding across the hardwood floor. Jackson smiled, turning to see his daughter's sleepy face. Her brown hair was still tousled from sleep, and she rubbed her eyes as she climbed onto one of the kitchen stools. "Good morning, sweetheart." And yes, eggs, toast, and fruit. Building strong soldiers, remember? Emily giggled, a sound that never failed to warm his heart. "Dad, I'm not a soldier. I'm just a fifth grader." "Well, fifth grade is its own kind of battlefield, isn't it?" Jackson winked, sliding a perfectly cooked egg onto her plate. He'd learned to make them just the way she liked, not too runny, but soft enough to soak into the toast. While Emily ate, Jackson checked his phone for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The calendar notification for the 10 a.m. board meeting seemed to stare back at him accusingly. He'd never been nervous about company meetings before, but something about this one felt different. The email had been unusually formal, requiring all security staff to be present. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, noticing his furrowed brow. She had always been perceptive, picking up on his moods, even when he tried to hide them. Jackson quickly pocketed his phone and forced a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetie. Just a big meeting today with the board of directors." He started packing her lunch, another task he performed with precision. Sandwich cut diagonally, crusts removed, apples sliced into perfect wedges, and a small treat tucked into the corner of her lunchbox. "But you've had lots of meetings before," Emily pointed out, pushing her empty plate away. "You're the best at your job, Dad. Everyone says so." Jackson's chest tightened with love for his daughter. She had such faith in him, just like her mother had. "You're right," he said, reaching over to smooth down a stubborn cowlick in her hair. "I've been there 12 years, nothing to worry about." Emily hopped down from her stool and headed to her room to get dressed. Jackson could hear her humming as she went, some pop song he couldn't quite identify. While she was gone, he checked his email again. Still, nothing new about the meeting. When Emily returned, she was wearing the purple sweater her grandmother had given her for Christmas and had attempted to brush her hair, though it still needed some help. Jackson gestured for her to sit on the stool again as he picked up her brush from the counter, where it always lay in its designated spot. "Hey, what do you say we get ice cream after school today?" he suggested as he gently worked through the tangles. "Celebrate another successful day?" Emily's face lit up. "Really? Can I get 2 scoops? We'll see about that, soldier." Jackson chuckled, finishing with her hair and securing it with a hair tie. He glanced at his watch. Another military habit. "Time to move out. Got everything? Homework? Lunch?" Emily did a mock salute, making Jackson laugh. "Yes, sir. All packed and ready for deployment." They walked to the front door together, where Emily slipped on her shoes while Jackson did one final check of her backpack. Everything was there, neat and organized, just as he liked it. His own briefcase sat ready by the door, his laptop inside already prepared for the meeting. The drive to school was filled with Emily's chatter about her upcoming science project and the latest drama in her friend group. Jackson listened attentively, pushing aside his own concerns about the meeting. The morning sun painted the small town in gentle gold, glinting off shop windows and early morning dew. "Remember, ice cream after school," Emily called out as she hopped out of the car in front of Riverside Elementary. "You promised." "I remember," Jackson assured her, watching as she joined the stream of students heading into the building. He waited until she disappeared inside before pulling away from the curb, just as he did every morning. The drive home seemed shorter than usual, his mind preoccupied with the upcoming meeting. Back in his home office, Jackson straightened his tie and checked his appearance in the small mirror on the wall. His dark hair was neat, showing touches of gray at the temples that Emily liked to tease him about. The lines around his eyes were deeper than they used to be, but his posture remained military straight. At 9:55 a.m., Jackson logged into the Zoom meeting. His screen filled with small boxes as other security staff members joined, their faces familiar from years of working together. At exactly 10 a.m., the board members appeared, all 11 of them, their expressions unusually grave. Jackson sat up straighter in his chair, his stomach tightening with an all-too-familiar sensation, the same one he'd felt before difficult missions. "Good morning, everyone," he said, keeping his voice steady and professional. The response from the board members was muted, their faces remaining stern and unsmiling. In that moment, Jackson's earlier unease crystallized into something more concrete, and he found himself wishing he hadn't made that ice cream promise to Emily. Jackson reached for his phone, checking the time again. 9:58 a.m. In 2 minutes, he joined the Zoom board meeting, something that had become routine over the past year. Yet today, an unfamiliar nervousness twisted in his stomach as he noticed all 11 board members already waiting in the virtual room. He straightened his tie, a gesture that reminded him of adjusting his uniform before military inspections, and clicked Join Meeting. 11 serious faces filled his screen, arranged in neat squares like a digital chessboard. The usual casual greetings were notably absent. "Good morning, everyone," Jackson said, maintaining his professional composure despite the growing unease in his chest. Chairman Robert Wells cleared his throat, his expression stern behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Cole, thank you for joining us promptly." The formal tone sent a chill down Jackson's spine. "We'll dispense with the usual pleasantries and get straight to the point. The board has been conducting a thorough review of our organizational structure over the past month." Jackson's fingers tightened around his mouse as Wells continued, each word falling like ice into his stomach. "Due to necessary restructuring measures, your position with the company is being terminated, effective immediately." The words hit Jackson like a physical blow. He stared at the screen, certain he had misheard. I don't understand," he managed, his voice barely steady. "I've been with the company for 12 years. The decision has been made unanimously," Wells continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your severance package details will be sent to your email within the hour. We expect all company property to be returned by end of business tomorrow." Jackson leaned forward, his military training kicking in as he fought to maintain his composure. "Sir, with all due respect, my record has been spotless. I've led the security division through 3 major expansions. I've never even taken a sick day." One of the board members, Sarah Henderson, at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Wells remained unmoved. "This isn't about your performance, Mr. Cole. It's about restructuring for the company's future." "The company's future?" Jackson's voice rose slightly. "I've dedicated my life to this company's future. After my wife passed, you all sent cards, said I was family." The sound of the front door opening made Jackson freeze mid-sentence. Emily wasn't supposed to be home yet. There must have been a mix-up about the teacher planning day. He heard her familiar footsteps in the hallway. "As I said, Mr. Cole, the decision is final," Wells was saying, but Jackson was barely listening now. Emily had appeared in the doorway of his home office, her backpack still on her shoulders, her expression changing from confusion to concern as she took in the scene. "Daddy," she asked quietly, just as Wells continued, "your access to company systems will be terminated at noon today." Emily's eyes widened as she processed the words. Jackson watched helplessly as his daughter's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. A sob escaped her throat, the sound hitting him harder than any of Wells's cold pronouncements. "I have to go," Jackson said abruptly, his voice thick. "My daughter, of course," Wells replied smoothly. "HR will be in touch. Good day, Mr. Cole." Jackson barely registered the chorus of squares disappearing from his screen. Emily stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her face. He pushed back from his desk and opened his arms. "Come here, sweetheart." She ran to him, crashing into his chest with the force of her grief. Her backpack slipped off her shoulders and thudded to the floor as she buried her face in his shirt. "They can't fire you," she sobbed. "You're the best person they have. Jackson held her close, one hand stroking her hair as she cried. His own shock was temporarily pushed aside by the need to comfort his daughter. Shh, he soothed, though his own heart was racing. It's going to be okay. Emily pulled back slightly, her face red and tear-stained. But what are we going to do? Her bottom lip trembled. Are we going to lose our house? Will I have to change schools? Jackson cupped her face in his hands, gently wiping away tears with his thumbs. Hey, look at me. He waited until her watery eyes met his. We've been through tough times before, haven't we? After Mom. He swallowed hard. After Mom passed, we stuck together. We got through it. Emily sniffled, her small hands clutching his shirt. But you always say how important your job is, how it keeps us safe. The job was important, Jackson agreed, choosing his words carefully. But you know what's more important? Us! You and me, kiddo! We're a team! Fresh tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as she whispered, Are we going to be okay, Daddy? Jackson pulled her close again, his daughter's question echoing in his mind as he stared at the closed laptop on his desk. The same question was screaming through his own thoughts, along with 100 others he couldn't voice. But he had to be strong for Emily. He had to believe they would find a way through this, just as they had before. He held his daughter tighter, feeling her tears soaking through his shirt, and tried to ignore the trembling in his own hands. The morning sun still streamed through the window, mockingly bright and cheerful, illuminating the perfectly polished boots by the door, a symbol of the order and discipline that had just been shattered by an impersonal Zoom call. The kitchen was filled with the familiar sizzle of ground beef browning in the pan as Jackson stood at the stove, methodically stirring. The routine of cooking dinner helped steady his hands, even if his mind was still reeling from the morning's devastating news. He'd made tacos hundreds of times, Emily's favorite, but tonight each motion felt heavier, weighed down by worry. Something smells good, Emily called from the living room where she was finishing her homework. Her voice carried that same bright optimism it always did, though Jackson had noticed her stealing concerned glances at him throughout the afternoon. Taco Tuesday, Jackson replied, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. Want to help me shred the lettuce? Emily bounded into the kitchen, her sock feet sliding a little on the tile floor. She grabbed the head of lettuce from the fridge and settled at the counter with a knife and cutting board. Jackson had taught her proper knife safety last year, and she took pride in being trusted with kitchen duties. Dad? She asked, carefully slicing through the lettuce. Is Mrs. Martinez going to be mad that I can't go to dance class anymore? The question hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. He hadn't even thought about her after-school activities yet. Hey, sweetheart, he said, turning down the heat under the meat. Let's not worry about that just yet, okay? We're going to figure everything out. Emily nodded, but her lower lip trembled slightly. I heard you earlier, on the computer. They weren't very nice to you. Jackson abandoned the stove and moved to wrap his arms around his daughter. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and graphite pencils, the familiar scent of his little girl. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't seem fair, he said carefully. But you know what? We're going to be just fine. You know why? Emily looked up at him, her eyes serious. Because we're Coles, and Coles never give up? That's right. Jackson kissed the top of her head, remembering Sarah saying those exact words during her final days in the hospital. He'd promised his wife then that he would never let Emily feel abandoned or uncertain about her future. Now, how about we finish making these tacos before the meat burns? Dinner was quieter than usual, but Jackson made sure to ask about Emily's day at school and listen to her story about the class guinea pig escaping during math. After helping with dishes, they settled into their evening routine. Homework check, TV show, bath time, and finally bedtime. As Jackson tucked Emily into bed, surrounded by her collection of stuffed animals, she grabbed his hand. Daddy, can we say an extra prayer tonight? Of course we can, sweetheart. Emily closed her eyes, her small fingers still wrapped around his. Dear God, please help Daddy not be worried anymore. And please help him find a new job with nice people who won't be mean on the computer. And thank you for tacos. Amen. Jackson's throat tightened. Amen, he echoed, pulling the covers up to her chin. I love you, Emily. Love you too, Daddy. Don't forget to turn on my nightlight. After making sure Emily was settled, Jackson retreated to the kitchen. The house felt especially quiet now, the kind of silence that made thoughts echo louder. He opened his laptop, staring at the blank email compose window for several long moments before beginning to type. "Dear Pastor Hayes," he wrote, "I hope this email finds you well. I'm reaching out because I could use some guidance and prayer." He detailed the morning's events, trying to keep his words measured even as emotion threatened to spill over. After sending the email to Pastor Hayes, he composed similar messages to 3 of his closest friends from his military days, men who had stood beside him in combat and at Sarah's funeral, men who understood both strength and vulnerability. The kitchen table gradually disappeared under a spread of bills and budget worksheets. Jackson's military training had taught him to face problems head-on, to analyze and strategize. But looking at the numbers, at their modest savings account balance, at the mortgage payments, and Emily's school expenses, made his chest tight with anxiety. His eyes drifted to the refrigerator, where Emily's latest artwork hung proudly. It was a crayon drawing she'd made last month for career day at school, a figure in what appeared to be a superhero cape, but wearing his old military boots. "Daddy the Hero" was written across the top in her careful third-grade handwriting. Below it, she'd added, "He keeps us safe and makes the best tacos." Jackson's vision blurred as he stared at the drawing. He'd faced down enemies in combat, survived the loss of his beloved wife, rebuilt a life for himself and Emily. Surely he could find a way through this too. But exhaustion was creeping in, making his thoughts fuzzy around the edges. He rested his head on his arms. Just for a moment, bills scattered around him like fallen leaves. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time as Jackson drifted off, his daughter's artwork standing guard from its place of honor on the fridge. The bell above Mary's diner chimed as Jackson pushed open the glass door the next morning. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon wrapped around him like a warm blanket. He'd been coming here every Saturday morning for years, but today felt different. His shoulders tensed as he noticed several heads turn his way. "Jackson Cole, get yourself over here!" Betty, the silver-haired waitress who'd worked at Mary's for 2 decades, waved him toward the counter. Her smile was warmer than usual, touched with concern. "Coffee's already poured, Honorable." He slid onto his usual stool, nodding thanks as Betty placed a steaming mug in front of him. The ceramic was chipped at the rim, the same cup she always saved for him. "Heard what happened yesterday," Betty said softly, laying a gentle hand on his arm. "That company doesn't know what they're losing. You've been nothing but good to this town." Jackson wrapped his hands around the warm mug, studying the dark liquid. "News travels fast. Small town," Betty shrugged. "But that means you've got people in your corner too." From 2 stools down, Mike Thompson, a retired Marine who'd served in the same war as Jackson, cleared his throat. "She's right, Cole." He shifted over to sit next to Jackson. "Listen, some of us were talking. We want to start a fundraiser. Help tide you and Emily over until something better comes along." Jackson's throat tightened. "Mike, I couldn't." "You could and you will." Mike cut him off firmly. "Remember when my Sarah was sick last year? This town showed up for us. Now it's your turn." More voices joined in from nearby booths. Mrs. Henderson, Emily's former 3rd-grade teacher, spoke up. "We take care of our own here, Jackson." Several others nodded in agreement. Betty slid a plate of eggs and hash browns in front of him. "On the house today, sugar. And Emily's welcome to all the chocolate milkshakes she wants." Jackson blinked hard, overcome by the sudden outpouring of support. "Thank you," he managed. "All of you." The conversation turned to practical matters as Mike pulled out his phone. "We can set up one of those online fundraising things. My daughter knows how to do it. And the VFW hall's open for a community dinner next weekend, if you're okay with it." Throughout breakfast, more townspeople stopped by his seat. Some offered job leads. Others just squeezed his shoulder in passing. Each gesture of kindness helped lift the weight that had been crushing his chest since yesterday. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Jackson straightened Emily's dress collar as they walked up the church steps. Her patent leather shoes clicked against the concrete, and she practically bounced with excitement. "Can I sit with Sarah today?" she asked, spotting her friend near the entrance. "Go ahead," Jackson smiled, watching her skip off. Pastor Hayes stood at the door, greeting everyone with his usual warmth. "Jackson," the pastor clasped his hand firmly. "Good to see you this morning. Thanks for answering my email last night, Pastor." "Of course. Stay after service. We need to talk." The congregation sang with particular spirit that morning. Jackson felt the vibrations of the organ through the wooden pew. Emily's sweet voice joining the harmony beside him. When Pastor Hayes stepped up to the pulpit for announcements, he fixed the congregation with his steady gaze. "Family," he began, using his familiar term for the congregation. "One of our own is facing a challenge. Jackson Cole, who has served this community and his country with honor, recently lost his position through no fault of his own. As Christians, we're called to bear one another's burdens." Emily grabbed Jackson's hand, squeezing tight as Pastor Hayes continued. "We'll be taking up a special offering next Sunday. The deacons are organizing meal deliveries, and Mike Thompson has set up an online fundraiser. Details are in your bulletin. Most importantly, I know this congregation will surround the Coles with prayer and practical support." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the sanctuary. Emily beamed up at Jackson, her face glowing. "See, Daddy? Everything's going to get better." After service, dozens of people approached them. Emily basked in the attention, accepting hugs and cookies, while Jackson received business cards and promises of networking help. Pastor Hayes pulled him aside for a moment of prayer, his weathered hand steady on Jackson's shoulder. That evening, Jackson's heart felt lighter than it had in days. He sat on the edge of Emily's bed, watching as she arranged her stuffed animals just so, a bedtime ritual she'd never outgrown. "Today was a good day," she declared, hugging her favorite teddy bear. "And Betty said I can have free milkshakes. Can we go tomorrow after school?" Jackson smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "We'll see. Maybe we should space out those milkshakes a bit. Sarah's mom said I can come over whenever you need to go to job interviews," Emily continued, snuggling under her quilted coverlet. "And Pastor Hayes said God has a plan, even if we can't see it yet." "Pastor Hayes is a wise man," Jackson said softly. "I know we'll be okay." Emily yawned, her eyes growing heavy. "Because we have the best friends ever. And because you're the bravest daddy in the world." Jackson tucked the blanket around her shoulders, his heart full. "Sweet dreams, princess." He kissed her forehead and moved to turn off the lamp. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart? Can we pray extra tonight? To say thank you for all our friends?" Jackson knelt beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. They bowed their heads together as he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the overwhelming kindness they'd been shown, for the strength of community, and for the hope that had begun to bloom again in both their hearts. Jackson sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen. The blinking cursor mocked him as he tried to summarize 12 years of dedication into neat bullet points on his resume. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the scattered papers before him. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor nearby, working on her math homework. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at him with concern in her eyes, as if making sure he was still there. "How do you spell supervisor, Dad?" she asked, twirling her pencil. Jackson managed a small smile. "Super." A sharp knock at the front door cut him off. 3 firm raps that seemed to echo through their small house. Emily jumped up and rushed to the window, her math forgotten. "Daddy." Her voice dropped to a whisper, face pressed against the glass. "There are men in suits." Jackson's military instincts kicked in. He moved quickly to the window, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulder. 2 figures stood on their front porch, a woman and a man, both in dark suits that screamed federal agents. The woman held up a badge, catching the morning light. "Mr. Jackson Cole," the female agent called out. "This is the United States Secret Service. We need to speak with you." Emily's fingers dug into his arm. "Secret Service?" she whispered, eyes wide with fear. Jackson's mouth went dry. He dealt with federal agencies during his military service, but the Secret Service showing up at his door? His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "It's okay, sweetie," he said to Emily, trying to keep his voice steady. "Stay behind me." He opened the door, maintaining what he hoped was a calm expression. The female agent stepped forward first. She was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Cole, I'm Agent Maria Alvarez," she said, showing her credentials. "This is Agent Thompson. May we come in?" Jackson studied their badges carefully, years of security training kicking in. They were genuine. He stepped back, guiding Emily with him. "Of course," he said, gesturing to the living room. "Emily, honey, why don't you go to your room?" "No." Emily clutched his arm tighter. "I want to stay with you." Agent Alvarez's expression softened slightly as she looked at Emily. It's all right if she stays, Mr. Cole. We just need to ask you some questions. They moved to the living room, where Emily's math homework still lay scattered on the floor. The agent sat on the couch while Jackson took the armchair. Emily perched on its arm like a nervous bird. Mr. Cole, Agent Alvarez began, her tone professional but not unkind. You were until recently the head of security clearance at Midwest Regional Security, correct? Yes, for 12 years. Jackson's hand found Emily's, squeezing gently. Until 3 days ago. Agent Thompson pulled out a notepad. And during your time there, you were responsible for vetting all personnel and approving security clearances? That's right. Jackson felt his pulse quickening. Every employee, contractor, and vendor went through my office. Agent Alvarez leaned forward slightly. Mr. Cole, we're here because Midwest Regional Security is currently under federal investigation. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily's grip on his hand tightened. Investigation? Jackson repeated. For what? Corruption, embezzlement, and possible ties to domestic extremism, Agent Alvarez said carefully, watching his reaction. As the person responsible for security clearances, you are currently a person of interest in our investigation. Emily gasped, her voice trembling. Daddy, did you do something bad? The living room felt smaller with the two Secret Service agents seated across from Jackson. Agent Alvarez sat with perfect posture, her dark suit crisp and neat. Her partner, Agent Thompson, kept his eyes fixed on Jackson's every movement, his jaw tight with suspicion. Emily huddled close to Jackson on their worn leather couch, her small hand gripping his arm. He could feel her trembling slightly. Emily, sweetheart, Jackson said gently. Why don't you go work on your art project in your room? The one with the butterflies? She looked up at him with worried eyes. But Dad, it's okay, he assured her, managing a smile. I'll come get you when we're done. Emily reluctantly gathered her books, casting uncertain glances at the agents as she left. Once her footsteps faded upstairs, Agent Alvarez opened a sleek laptop. Mr. Cole, she began, her tone professional but not unkind. We need to discuss your role in security clearance procedures at Sterling Securities. For the next 3 hours, Jackson walked them through every detail of his work. He pulled up files on his computer, showing them the standard protocols he'd followed for 12 years. His hands trembled slightly as he entered passwords and retrieved documents. Each clearance required 3 levels of verification, he explained, pointing to the screen. I never approved anyone without complete background checks and proper documentation. Agent Thompson leaned forward. And you never noticed any irregularities? No pressure to rush certain applications through? No, sir, Jackson said firmly. I took my responsibilities seriously. Military training teaches you the importance of security protocols. Agent Alvarez's dark eyes studied him carefully. We found some concerning patterns in clearances granted to certain contractors over the past 18 months. Applications that seem to have skipped standard waiting periods. Jackson's stomach clenched. That's impossible. I personally reviewed every... He stopped, remembering something. Unless there was a system upgrade last year. The board said it would streamline the process. Tell us more about that, Alvarez said, her pen poised over her notepad. As the afternoon sun crept across the room, Jackson's throat grew dry from talking. He answered endless questions about board meetings, security protocols, and company procedures. Agent Alvarez remained calm and methodical, while Thompson's skepticism seemed to grow with each answer. Finally, Alvarez closed her laptop. We'll need copies of all these files, Mr. Cole, and we may have more questions. Of course, Jackson said, his voice hoarse. Whatever you need. After the agents left, Jackson found Emily in her room, surrounded by half-finished paper butterflies. She hadn't colored a single one. Let's go to the park, he suggested, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. We both need some fresh air. The small neighborhood park was usually a peaceful place, with its aging swing set and wooden benches. But today, it felt different. Mrs. Peterson, who had always greeted them warmly, sat on her usual bench. When she saw them approach, her smile vanished. She gathered her things quickly, avoiding eye contact. As she hurried past, Jackson clearly heard her whisper into her phone. I always thought there was something off about him. All those years handling sensitive information. Emily's face fell. Dad, why is Mrs. Peterson acting weird? Jackson guided her toward the swings. Sometimes people jump to wrong conclusions, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about in church? About not judging others? Emily nodded, but her usual enthusiasm for swinging was missing. They stayed only 15 minutes before heading home. That evening, after tucking Emily into bed with extra hugs and reassurances, Jackson stood at his living room window. The street outside was quiet, peaceful even. Porch lights glowed softly, and a neighbor's cat prowled across a distant lawn. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. His reflection in the glass showed a man he barely recognized. Worry lines deeper than usual, shoulders tense with newfound burden. Just days ago, his biggest concern had been finding a new job. Now he faced something far more frightening. Suspicion of crimes that could destroy not just his reputation, but his entire life. Jackson pressed his forehead against the cool glass. The same window Emily had stood at this morning, spotting the agents. How quickly everything had changed. He wasn't just unemployed anymore. He was under federal investigation. The thought sent a chill through him despite the warm spring evening. Through the window, he watched Mr. Garcia across the street quickly avert his eyes and pull his curtains shut. The same neighbor who had offered to mow Jackson's lawn when he had the flu last winter now treated him like a criminal. The fear that had been building all day finally overwhelmed him. It wasn't just about him anymore. Every suspicious glance, every whispered rumor would affect Emily too. His daughter, who still believed her daddy was a hero, would have to face the consequences of these accusations. Jackson stepped back from the window, his hands shaking slightly as he drew the curtains closed. The quiet house suddenly felt like a fortress. But whether it was protecting them from the world or trapping them inside, he wasn't sure anymore. Jackson pushed his shopping cart down the cereal aisle of Walker's Market, the same store where he'd shopped for 12 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he reached for Emily's favorite cereal. His hand froze mid-reach when he saw Tom Walker, the owner's son, and his former high school teammate quickly turn his cart around and head the other direction. "Tom?" Jackson called out, but Tom kept walking, his shoulders stiff. The rejection stung. They'd played football together, celebrated birthdays, even helped each other move. Now Tom couldn't even look him in the eye. Jackson dropped the cereal box into his cart and moved on, trying to ignore the whispers that followed him through the store. At the checkout, Mrs. Henderson, who usually chatted about her grandchildren, kept her eyes down as she scanned his groceries. Her usual warm smile was replaced with tight lips and quick, nervous movements. "That'll be $67.42, she mumbled, still not meeting his gaze. Jackson handed over his credit card, his throat tight. "How's little Tommy doing in Little League?" Mrs. Henderson took his card with trembling fingers. "Fine," she said curtly, ending any chance of conversation. The drive home felt longer than usual, the weight of isolation pressing down on him. His phone buzzed, a text from Emily's teacher, Miss Roberts. "Need to discuss Emily. Please come to school." Jackson's heart sank. He turned the truck around, heading to Riverside Elementary. The school's brick building loomed before him, usually a place of pride, but now filling him with dread. In Miss Roberts' classroom, he found Emily sitting alone, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Her teacher stood nearby, her face etched with concern. "What happened?" Jackson asked, kneeling beside his daughter. Miss Roberts spoke softly. "During recess, some children were unkind. They were repeating things they'd heard at home." Emily lifted her tear-stained face. "They said you're a criminal, Daddy, that you stole money and helped bad people." "Tommy said his dad says you're going to jail." Jackson's chest tightened. He gathered Emily into his arms, feeling her tears dampen his shirt. "Those are lies, sweetheart. You know that, right? Sometimes people say mean things because they're scared or confused, but that doesn't make those things true." "I know," Emily whispered, clinging to him. "But it hurts." "Miss," Roberts cleared her throat, "I've addressed the bullying with the other children and their parents. Emily's such a bright student, Mr. Cole. We want to support both of you through this." Back home, after settling Emily with her favorite stuffed animals and a cup of hot chocolate, Jackson retreated to his study. His hand shook as he dialed Agent Alvarez's number. She answered on the third ring. "Agent Alvarez, it's Jackson Cole. My daughter." His voice cracked. "She's being bullied at school because of this investigation. Please, there must be something you can tell me about what's happening." There was a pause, and when Alvarez spoke again, her voice was softer. "Mr. Cole, I understand your frustration. We're working as quickly as we can. But these investigations take time. The best thing you can do right now is stay patient and cooperative. Patient? Jackson ran a hand through his hair. My community thinks I'm a criminal. My daughter is crying at school. The neighbors won't look at me. How long am I supposed to just wait? I know it's hard, Alvarez said. But if you trust the process, the truth will come out. Keep focusing on your daughter. She needs you strong right now. After hanging up, Jackson wandered into the kitchen. Emily's drawings still covered the fridge. Stick figures of them at the park, at the beach, holding hands. Happy moments that felt increasingly distant. He microwaved 2 TV dinners, setting them on the small kitchen table. Emily pushed her peas around with her fork, quieter than usual. Want to watch a movie after dinner? Jackson asked, trying to inject some normalcy into their evening. Emily nodded without looking up. Can we watch Mom's favorite, The Princess Bride? Of course we can, sweetie. After tucking Emily into bed later that night, Jackson returned to the kitchen. The envelope from the mortgage company sat unopened on the table, its edges crisp and threatening. He'd been avoiding it all day, knowing what it would say. The missed payment warning, the threat of foreclosure, the cold statistics of his dwindling savings. Jackson slumped into a chair, staring at the envelope. The house had been their dream, his and Sarah's. They'd painted every room together, planted the garden out back, marked Emily's height on the doorframe of her bedroom. Now it all felt like it was slipping away. One suspicion, one whisper, one missed payment at a time. He picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. The weight of it seemed to hold all his fears. Losing the house, failing Emily, watching their life crumble under the weight of accusations he couldn't fight. How much more could he take before something broke? The envelope stayed unopened on the table, a silent reminder of all he stood to lose. The evening sun cast long shadows through Jackson's living room windows when another knock came at the door. His shoulders tensed, remembering the last official visit. But when he peered through the peephole, he saw Agent Alvarez standing alone, wearing jeans and a casual blue sweater instead of her usual dark suit. Agent Alvarez? Jackson opened the door, confusion evident in his voice. Mr. Cole. She glanced around before speaking softly. May I come in? This isn't an official visit. Jackson hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let her enter. Emily peeked around the corner from the kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks. We're making cookies, she announced, her eyes brightening with recognition. Would you like some? They're chocolate chip. Alvarez's professional demeanor softened. That sounds wonderful, if your dad doesn't mind. Jackson nodded, studying the agent's face. She seemed different tonight. Less rigid, more human. Emily's been stress baking, he explained. It helps her feel better. Like Mom used to do, Emily added, disappearing back into the kitchen. The agent settled onto their worn leather couch, her posture relaxing slightly. Mr. Cole, I've been reviewing your case files every night after hours. Something isn't adding up. Jackson sat in his armchair, leaning forward. What do you mean? The security clearance protocols you oversaw. They were textbook perfect, but I found some irregularities in the contract approvals, specifically one signed by Gerald Morton. The board treasurer? Jackson's brow furrowed. I never had direct access to those. Emily bounded back in, proudly carrying a plate of slightly misshapen cookies. They're still warm. She offered them first to Alvarez, who took one with a genuine smile. These are delicious, Alvarez said after taking a bite. Emily beamed at the praise. The nice lady likes my cookies, Daddy. She settled cross-legged on the floor between them, looking up at Alvarez with open curiosity. Are you helping my dad? He didn't do anything wrong, you know. Something in Alvarez's expression shifted as she looked at Emily. I'm starting to see that, she said softly. She turned back to Jackson. Mr. Cole, I believe you're innocent, but I need your help to prove it. Jackson felt a weight lift from his chest, the first ray of hope he'd had in days. What kind of help? Alvarez pulled out a small notebook. I need you to walk me through every interaction you had with Morton over the past year. Any meetings, emails, or conversations that seemed odd. The smallest detail could matter. Emily gathered up her courage and spoke again. Mr. Morton came to our house once. Remember, Daddy? He wanted to talk to you alone, but you said all business had to happen at the office. Jackson's eyes widened. I'd forgotten about that. It was about 6 months ago. That's exactly the kind of information we need, Alvarez said, scribbling in her notebook. She looked at Emily with approval. You have a very good memory. Emily ducked her head, pleased.
I'm going to check on the next batch of cookies.
She skipped back to the kitchen, humming. Once Emily was out of earshot, Alvarez lowered her voice. Listen, what I'm doing, coming here like this, it's not exactly by the book. But something about your case has been bothering me since day one. My father was a veteran too, and he taught me to trust my instincts. Jackson studied her face, seeing beyond the badge for the first time. There was compassion in her eyes, and determination. Why risk your career to help me? Because I've seen too many good people get caught in the crossfire of other people's crimes. She pulled out several documents. These contracts, the signatures, the dates, the amounts, they don't match standard procedures. But someone wanted them pushed through anyway. They spent the next hour going through papers, interrupted occasionally by Emily bringing fresh cookies and asking questions about Alvarez's job that made both adults smile. The agent answered each question patiently, treating Emily's curiosity with respect. As the sky darkened outside, Alvarez gathered her materials. We need to be careful how we proceed. If Morton is behind this, he has resources and connections we don't fully understand yet. Jackson walked her to the door, Emily trailing behind them. Thank you, he said quietly, for believing me. The nice lady will help us, right? Emily tugged at Alvarez's sleeve.
You'll show everyone Daddy's a good person?
Alvarez knelt down to Emily's level. I'm certainly going to try my best. She stood and extended her hand to Jackson. We'll need to work together on this, quietly. Are you willing to trust me? Jackson took her hand, his grip firm and grateful. Yes. Whatever you need. They shook hands, sealing their alliance in the growing darkness of the evening. Emily hugged her father's leg, looking up at both adults with renewed hope in her eyes. Wait! Emily suddenly darted back to the kitchen, returning with a paper napkin wrapped around several cookies. For later, she said, pressing them into Alvarez's hands. The agent's professional mask cracked completely as she accepted the gift with visible emotion. Thank you, Emily. These might just be the best cookies I've ever had. The public library stood quiet and nearly empty on the rainy Tuesday afternoon. Jackson sat at a corner computer station, his fingers drumming nervously on the wooden desk as he waited. The familiar smell of old books and the soft whir of the air conditioning usually brought him comfort, but today his shoulders remained tense. Agent Alvarez appeared between the reference shelves, dressed in casual clothes instead of her usual suit. She carried a laptop bag and wore reading glasses, a clever touch that made her blend in perfectly with the other library patrons. She pulled up a chair next to Jackson, keeping her voice low. Smart choice meeting here, she said. Public place, but private enough, and the library's Wi-Fi is more secure than most. Jackson nodded, already logging into his personal email account. I kept copies of everything important from work. Not because I didn't trust anyone, but because you're thorough, Alvarez finished. That military training doesn't just disappear. He pulled up a folder of archived emails and security clearance documents. These are all the rushed applications from the past year, the ones that made me uncomfortable. Alvarez connected her laptop, typing rapidly. I can cross-reference these with our database of flagged defense contracts. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the screen. There's a pattern here. Look at these dates. Jackson leaned in, scanning the documents. The memories started flooding back. Late nights at the office, urgent meetings called with little notice. These all involve Randall Pierce, he said quietly. He'd show up unannounced, usually after hours, pushing for immediate approval on certain contracts. Tell me more about Pierce, Alvarez said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Jackson's jaw tightened. Board member for 15 years. Always polished, always smiling. But there was something off. He'd make jokes about cutting corners, about how rules were meant to be bent. He shook his head. I should have seen it sooner. Don't blame yourself, Alvarez said firmly. Men like Pierce count on people giving them the benefit of the doubt. She turned her laptop screen toward him. Look at these payment records. Jackson's eyes widened as he saw the numbers. Large sums moving through shell companies, all tied to contracts Pierce had pushed through. These amounts. They're way above standard rates. For security consulting. Exactly. Alvarez pulled up another window. And look who signed off on all of them. The signature was unmistakable. Randall Pierce's flowing script appeared on document after document. Jackson remembered how Pierce would lean over his desk, all charm and casual authority. "Just need your stamp of approval, Jackson. You know how these deadlines are. We trust your judgment." "He used my reputation," Jackson said, his voice rough. "My clean record. He knew nobody would question security clearances if I'd signed off on them." Alvarez nodded grimly. "Classic move. Find the most trustworthy person in the organization and use their credibility as cover." She paused, studying his face. "That's why I believed you from the start. Your reaction when we first questioned you, that wasn't the response of someone who'd been caught. It was the response of someone who'd been betrayed." Jackson swallowed hard, touched by her insight. He turned back to his screen, pulling up more files. "Here, these are the meeting minutes where Pierce first started pushing for expedited approvals. See how he always had some excuse about losing contracts to competitors if we didn't move faster?" They worked methodically through the documents. Alvarez's federal clearance giving them access to financial records that painted an increasingly damning picture. Pierce had been selling security access, using Jackson's legitimate approvals as cover for far more questionable contracts. "We need to copy all of this," Alvarez said, pulling out an encrypted drive. "Carefully, systematically. Building a case like this is like building a house. The foundation has to be solid." Jackson started transferring files, each one feeling like another weight lifting from his shoulders. But worry still gnawed at him. "Will this be enough?" "It's a start," Alvarez said. "A good start, combined with what we already had." She glanced at her watch. "We should wrap up. Being thorough is important, but so is being careful. We don't want to draw attention." They methodically copied the crucial files, Alvarez marking each one with case numbers in her precise way. When they finished, she secured the drive in her laptop bag. "Same time Thursday?" she asked, standing and pushing in her chair. "We can go through the rest of those meeting minutes then." Jackson nodded, logging out of his accounts with careful precision. "I'll bring everything I have on Pierce's late-night visits. Times, dates, which contracts he was pushing." "Perfect." Alvarez adjusted her reading glasses. "And Jackson? We're going to fix this. I promise." He watched her walk away between the tall shelves, disappearing as quietly as she'd arrived. The library hummed with its usual peaceful sounds. Pages turning, keyboards clicking, the soft murmur of students at the study tables. For the first time in weeks, Jackson felt something close to peace. They had evidence. They had a plan. Most importantly, they had the truth on their side. He gathered his things, thinking of Emily waiting at her friend's house. Maybe tonight they'd have pizza to celebrate this small victory. As he walked through the library's automatic doors into the afternoon sun, Jackson allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. The morning sun had barely risen when Jackson heard the first shouts outside his home. He was at the kitchen counter, preparing Emily's lunch for school, when angry voices pierced through their normally quiet street. "Traitor!" someone yelled. "Company killer!" Emily appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, what's happening?" Jackson's hands trembled as he tried to keep his movements steady, continuing to spread peanut butter on the sandwich. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just some people who are confused about things." More voices joined the chorus outside. Through the kitchen window, Jackson could see a small group forming on his front lawn, some holding hastily made signs. "No rats in our town," read one in thick black letters. "Maybe I should stay home today," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. Jackson set down the knife and knelt before his daughter, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Remember what we talked about being brave?" She nodded, but her lower lip quivered. "I know it's scary, but we haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes doing the right thing means facing people who don't understand." The shouting grew louder. Jackson walked to the front window, keeping Emily behind him. The crowd had grown to about 20 people. He recognized faces, parents from Emily's school, former co-workers, even Mr. Coworkers. Thompson from the hardware store who'd always given Emily free candy. His phone buzzed. A text from Agent Alvarez. "Heard about the protests. Stay inside. We're monitoring." Emily clutched his hand. "Will they hurt us?" "No, sweetie. They're just angry and scared." But Jackson felt his own fear rising. He called Emily's school and arranged for her to be picked up at the back door, away from the commotion. After Emily left for school, Jackson retreated to his bedroom, closing the door against the persistent shouts. He sank to his knees beside his bed, just as he'd done countless nights during his military service. "Lord," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I don't understand. I've always tried to do what's right. To be honest, to protect others." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "I'm scared. Not for me, but for Emily. She doesn't deserve this." The protesters stayed throughout the day. Some left, others arrived. Their signs grew more personal. Jackson Cole destroys families, and veterans against traitors. By late afternoon, Emily's teacher called. Some parents had complained about Emily being in class with their children. They worried about federal investigation contamination, whatever that meant. Jackson's heart shattered at the thought of his daughter being treated like a disease. When Emily came home, she ran straight to her room. Jackson found her curled up with her stuffed bear, the one her mother had given her before passing. "Sarah Martinez wouldn't sit next to me at lunch," she said softly. "She said her mom told her I'm not safe anymore." Jackson sat on the edge of her bed, fighting back tears. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. This isn't fair to you. Why are they so mad at us, Daddy? We didn't do anything wrong." Sometimes people get scared when they don't understand what's happening, and scared people can be unkind. The protests continued into the evening. As darkness fell, someone threw an egg at their front window. The wet splat made Emily jump and cry out. Jackson called the police, but they seemed reluctant to help. "As long as they stay on public property, there's not much we can do," the dispatcher said, sounding almost apologetic. Around 9 o'clock, after Jackson had finally gotten Emily to sleep, he sat in his darkened living room, head in his hands. The protesters had dwindled to a handful, but their presence felt like a physical weight on his chest. A gentle knock at the back door startled him. Through the window, he saw Pastor Hayes' familiar silhouette. Jackson quickly let him in. "I came as soon as I could get away," the pastor said, his kind face creased with concern. "I've been trying to reason with some of them, but fear has a way of closing people's ears." They sat at the kitchen table, where Jackson had first received the news of his termination just days ago. It felt like years had passed since then. "I don't know how much more I can take," Jackson admitted, his voice rough. "Not for me, but Emily. She's suffering because of me." Pastor Hayes reached across the table and gripped Jackson's arm. "You're doing the right thing, son. Remember who you are. A soldier who stood guard while others slept. A father who's raised a beautiful daughter alone. A man of integrity who's facing giants because it's right, not because it's easy. But what if truth always wins, Jackson? Maybe not as quickly as we'd like, but it does win. You know this from your service. Some battles take time, but good men stand firm." Jackson wiped his eyes. "Emily asked me today if God was punishing us. And what did you tell her?" "I told her God doesn't punish people for telling the truth." Pastor Hayes smiled. "That's right. You're teaching her something valuable right now, even if it hurts. You're showing her that integrity matters more than popularity. That truth matters more than comfort." Through the window, they could see the last protesters finally leaving, their signs dragging in the dark. "Your wife would be proud of you both," Pastor Hayes said softly. "Standing strong, supporting each other. This storm will pass, Jackson, and when it does, you'll be stronger for having weathered it together." For the first time that day, Jackson felt his shoulders relax slightly. The pastor's words, weighted with years of wisdom and genuine care, settled into his heart like anchor points against the chaos. "Thank you for coming," Jackson said, "especially this late." "That's what shepherds do," Pastor Hayes replied with a warm smile. "We check on our flock when wolves are circling." The morning light streamed through Jackson's kitchen window as Agent Alvarez sat across from him at the table. Her usual stern expression had softened, and she held a thick manila folder in her hands. Emily perched on the chair next to her father, fidgeting with nervous energy. "Mr. Cole," Alvarez began, her voice carrying an unusual warmth, "I wanted to deliver this news in person." She opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. "Our investigation has conclusively cleared you of any wrongdoing. You are officially no longer a suspect in this case." Jackson stared at the papers, his vision blurring with sudden tears. His hands trembled as he picked up the official clearance document, the federal letterhead, crisp and formal. "Really?" Emily's voice cracked with emotion. "Daddy's not in trouble anymore?" "That's right," Alvarez confirmed, smiling at the young girl. Your father is completely innocent. We found evidence that proves he was never involved in any illegal activities. Emily launched herself at Jackson, wrapping her arms around his neck.
I knew it. I knew you didn't do anything bad.
She was crying now too, happy tears soaking into his shirt collar. Jackson held his daughter tight, one hand still gripping the clearance papers. The weight that had been crushing him for weeks finally lifted, leaving him lightheaded with relief.
Thank you,
he managed to say to Alvarez.
Thank you for believing in me.
There's more, Alvarez continued. The town council has called an emergency meeting this afternoon. I'll be there to make a public statement about your innocence. We think it's important for the community to hear the truth officially. 3 hours later, Jackson stood at the back of the packed town hall. The wooden benches were filled with familiar faces, some apologetic, others curious, a few still suspicious. Emily sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. Mayor Thompson stepped up to the podium, his usual jovial manner subdued. Citizens of Pine Ridge, we're here today to address recent events concerning one of our own. I'll now turn the floor over to Special Agent Maria Alvarez of the United States Secret Service. Alvarez approached the podium in her official capacity, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Good afternoon. I'm here to make a formal statement regarding Jackson Cole's involvement in the federal investigation of Sterling Security Solutions. The room fell silent. Jackson could feel dozens of eyes turned toward him. Our investigation has conclusively determined that Mr. Cole had no involvement in or knowledge of the illegal activities under investigation. In fact, his cooperation has been instrumental in uncovering the truth. Alvarez's voice carried authority through the hall. Mr. Cole has demonstrated exemplary integrity throughout this process, even in the face of unfair suspicion and hostility from his community. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jackson saw Mrs. Peterson, who'd organized some of the protests outside his house, drop her head in shame. Furthermore, Alvarez continued, Mr. Cole's service record, both military and civilian, shows a consistent pattern of honesty and ethical behavior. The Secret Service officially apologizes for any distress our investigation may have caused him and his daughter. When Alvarez finished, Mayor Thompson returned to the podium. I think we owe Jackson an apology. Many of us jumped to conclusions without facts. We forgot that in this town, we're supposed to stand by each other. People began standing up, one by one, offering their apologies. Mr. Thompson from the hardware store approached Jackson directly, his eyes wet.
I'm sorry, son. I should have known better. You've always been one of the good ones.
Sarah Martinez's mother came up with her daughter in tow.
Sarah has something to say to Emily, she said gently.
Sarah shuffled her feet. I'm sorry I was mean to you at lunch. Can we be friends again? Emily looked up at Jackson, who nodded encouragingly, then hugged her former friend. Of course we can. After the meeting, they stopped at May's diner. May herself came out from the kitchen, setting a whole apple pie on their table. On the house? She insisted, patting Jackson's shoulder. And there's plenty more where that came from. They were halfway through their pie when Jackson's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. Jackson Cole? This is Richard Bennett, the interim CEO at Sterling Security Solutions. The voice was professional but friendly. I'm calling to discuss your future with the company. Jackson sat up straighter, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. Emily watched him intently, trying to read his expression. Once the federal investigation is complete and new management is in place, we'd like to offer you reinstatement, Bennett continued. Your position would be secure, with a raise to compensate for recent events. We need people of integrity as we rebuild. Jackson looked at Emily, who was practically bouncing in her seat with curiosity. He covered the phone's microphone. They want me back at work, honey. Emily's eyes lit up. Really? Can we stay in our house? Can I keep my room? Jackson smiled and returned to the call. Mr. Bennett, I appreciate the offer. When would you like to discuss details? They arranged a meeting for the following week. As Jackson hung up, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in weeks. Emily was already planning to redecorate her room, chattering excitedly about keeping her butterfly wallpaper. May brought them each a second slice of pie, beaming at their obvious happiness. Looks like good news? The best, Jackson replied, watching his daughter dig into the fresh slice with gusto. Things are finally turning around. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting a warm glow over the familiar checkered tablecloths and chrome fixtures. For the first time in weeks, Jackson could enjoy the simple pleasure of sharing pie with his daughter without fear clouding the moment. Emily reached across the table and squeezed his hand.
I love you, Daddy.
I love you too, sweetheart, he replied, squeezing back. I love you too. The evening shadows stretched long across Main Street as Jackson's truck rolled toward home. In the passenger seat, Emily hummed softly, her face glowing with relief after the town hall meeting. The memory of neighbors approaching one by one to apologize warmed Jackson's heart, though a trace of hurt lingered beneath the surface. Dad, did you see Mrs. Peterson crying when she hugged you? Emily asked, her voice bright.
And Mr. Thompson from the hardware store said he's keeping your job application right on top of the pile.
Jackson smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Yeah, sweetie. People can surprise you, sometimes in good ways. The truck pulled into their driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under tires a comforting sound. The porch light cast a welcoming glow, and for the first time in weeks, Jackson felt the weight lifting from his shoulders. Agent Alvarez's public declaration of his innocence had changed everything. Race you to the door, Emily called out, already unbuckling her seatbelt. Hold on there, speed demon, Jackson laughed, gathering his jacket and briefcase. Let me get my stuff first. They walked together up the short path to their front door, Emily chattering about how she couldn't wait to tell her best friend Katie that her dad was officially a good guy again. Jackson's hand froze on the doorknob as he noticed something white peeking out from under. The welcome mat. Emily, why don't you go around back and make sure we locked the gate to the garden, he said, keeping his voice steady. But Dad, we always lock it, she protested. Humor me, sweetheart. Once Emily rounded the corner, Jackson crouched down and carefully lifted the envelope. No markings, no return address. Just clean white paper, slightly crumpled from being pushed under the door. His military training kicked in as he examined it without touching it too much, looking for any suspicious residue or unusual bulk. Finding nothing immediately dangerous, he slowly opened it and removed a single sheet of paper. The message, typed in plain black letters, sent ice through his veins. Stay silent, or your daughter pays the price. His hands began to shake, the paper rattling softly in the evening breeze. The warmth of the town hall victory evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, familiar fear. The same fear he'd felt in combat when his unit was ambushed, but worse. This threat wasn't aimed at him. All clear, Dad, Emily's voice made him jump. He quickly folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Thanks, honey. He unlocked the door, ushering her inside quickly. Let's get in and get some dinner started. But dinner was the last thing on his mind as he methodically moved through their home, checking every window lock, every door, drawing all the curtains. Emily watched him with growing concern as he tested the back door handle 3 times. Daddy? Her small voice cut through his focused routine. Are we safe? Jackson paused, his hand still on the door handle. The question hit him like a physical blow. He turned to face his daughter, seeing the worry creeping back into her eyes. The same worry he'd worked so hard to erase these past few weeks. Come here, sweetheart. He knelt down, opening his arms. Emily ran into them, burying her face in his shoulder. We are safe. I promise you that. Your old man knows a thing or two about security, remember? She nodded against his chest, but her grip remained tight. Is it because of the bad people at your old job? Jackson's throat tightened. How could he explain this situation to a 10-year-old when he barely understood it himself? The evidence he and Alvarez had uncovered pointed to massive corruption, but he'd never imagined they'd stoop to threatening a child. Sometimes, he started carefully, when people do wrong things, they get scared when the truth starts coming out. But that's their problem, not ours. We're going to be just fine. Emily pulled back, studying his face with that uncanny perception she'd inherited from her mother. You always say being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're scared. That's right, Jackson agreed, though the words felt hollow with the threat letter burning in his pocket. So we're not going to let the bad guys win, right? Jackson forced a smile. Right. Now how about some dinner? I think we've still got stuff for spaghetti. The evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Jackson made dinner, helped Emily with her homework, and went through their usual bedtime routine, but his mind raced with possibilities, with dangers, with the faces of board members who might have ordered that threat. After tucking Emily in, he retrieved his shotgun from the gun safe, checking it methodically as his training demanded. The weapon was familiar in his hands, bringing back memories of both military service and peaceful hunting trips. But tonight, it represented something else. The lengths he would go to protect his daughter. He positioned himself in the living room, where he could see both the front door and the hallway leading to Emily's room. The house creaked and settled around him as the night deepened. Every sound made him tense. A cat walking across the porch, a car passing on the street, the wind rustling through the trees. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as Jackson sat rigid in his chair, the shotgun across his lap. His mind wandered to Agent Alvarez, wondering if he should call her. But what if they were watching the house? What if any move he made put Emily at greater risk? The truth they'd uncovered about the defense contracts was explosive, enough to send several board members to federal prison. He'd been ready to testify, to help bring justice. But now, with Emily's safety in the balance, duty and fear waged war in his heart. Hours passed. Jackson remained motionless, his military training allowing him to stay alert despite the late hour. He thought about Emily's words, about bravery, about doing the right thing even when scared. But this was different. This wasn't about his own safety. It was about his little girl, the one person he'd sworn to protect above all else. The first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside. But Jackson didn't move. The shotgun remained steady across his lap as he wrestled with the impossible choice before him. Speak up and risk his daughter's safety, or stay silent and let corruption win. Jackson's hands shook as he dialed Agent Alvarez's number. Outside his kitchen window, the street lamp cast an eerie glow across his front yard. Every shadow made him flinch. The threatening note lay on the table, its words burning in his mind. Stay silent, or your daughter pays the price. Alvarez, came the crisp response after 2 rings. Maria, it's Jackson. His voice cracked. Something happened after the town hall. Are you and Emily okay? The professional tone gave way to genuine concern, for now. But, he glanced toward Emily's room, lowering his voice. Someone left a note. They're threatening Emily. Silence filled the line for a moment. I'm coming over. 20 minutes. True to her word, Agent Alvarez arrived exactly 20 minutes later, her unmarked car pulling up quietly in front of the house. Jackson had already made coffee, his military training kicking in. Stay alert, stay focused. In the kitchen, Alvarez examined the note through an evidence bag, her face grim. This is serious, Jackson, but it also means we're close. They're scared. Close? Jackson ran his hands through his hair. Maria, they threatened my daughter, my little girl. His voice rose slightly, and he forced himself to lower it again. Maybe we should back off. Alvarez leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. Listen to me. If we stop now, they win. And people like this, they don't just go away. They'll always have this power over you, over Emily. I promised to protect her, Jackson whispered, his shoulders sagging. After Sarah died, I swore nothing would ever hurt Emily. And now, he gestured helplessly at the note. What kind of father puts his daughter in danger? The kind who shows her that standing up for what's right matters. Alvarez replied firmly. We're close to exposing everything. The irregular contracts, the offshore accounts, all of it. Randall Pierce won't be able to hide behind his boardroom anymore. Jackson stood and paced the kitchen, his coffee growing cold. I keep asking myself if this is some kind of test, if God is pushing me to see how much I can take. He stopped at the window, staring out into the darkness. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Dad? Both adults turned. Emily stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her stuffed giraffe clutched tight against her chest. Her hair was mussed from tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Emily, honey, you should be in bed, Jackson said softly, moving toward her. But Emily didn't budge. Her young face held a determination that reminded him so much of her mother. I heard you talking about being scared. Jackson knelt in front of her, his heart aching. Adult stuff, sweetie. Nothing for you to worry about. But Daddy, Emily's voice grew stronger. You told me something important once. Remember? When I was scared to stand up to Jenny Thompson for bullying Max at school? Jackson remembered. It had been just 2 months ago, though it felt like a lifetime. Emily's chin lifted. You said courage means doing what's right, even when we're scared. Her small hand reached out to touch his cheek. Are you forgetting your own words, Daddy? The kitchen fell silent. Alvarez watched the scene with gentle eyes, while Jackson felt tears threatening to spill. Here was his daughter, barely 10 years old, reminding him of his own teachings about bravery and integrity. "You're right, baby girl," he managed, pulling her into a tight hug. "When did you get so wise?" Emily giggled against his shoulder. "I learned from you, silly." Alvarez cleared her throat softly. "Your daughter's pretty smart, Jackson, and she's right." Jackson stood, keeping Emily close to his side. The weight of fear still pressed on his shoulders, but something else now pushed back against it: resolve. Emily's simple wisdom had cut through his doubts like a shaft of sunlight through storm clouds. "We'll increase security," Alvarez continued. "I'll have plainclothes officers watching the house and school. But we need to finish this, Jackson, for everyone they've hurt, and everyone they might hurt in the future." Jackson looked down at Emily, who gazed back up at him with complete trust in her eyes. The same trust she'd shown when they'd faced the loss of her mother together, when they'd moved to this town for a fresh start, when he'd promised her they'd always be okay. He bent down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. In that moment he felt his resolve crystallize. Yes, he would protect her, but not by backing down. He would protect her by showing her that good people stand up to bullies and corruption, no matter how scary it gets. "Agent Alvarez is right," he said softly to Emily. "Sometimes doing the right thing is hard and scary, but we do it anyway, don't we?" Emily nodded solemnly. "Together?" "Together," Jackson confirmed, hugging her close again. "Always together." Jackson stared at the threatening note on his kitchen table while Agent Alvarez paced beside him. The paper's edges were worn from how many times he picked it up, read it, and set it down again. Each time, Pierce's threat about Emily made his stomach churn. "We can use this," Alvarez said, her voice steady and professional. "Pierce is getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." Jackson ran his hands through his hair. "I can't risk Emily. She's all I have." "That's exactly why we need to end this now." Alvarez stopped pacing and leaned against the counter. "Pierce won't stop at threats. Men like him only escalate." Deep down, Jackson knew she was right. His military training had taught him that sometimes the best defense was a strong offense. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his daughter's safety. "What's your plan?" he finally asked. Alvarez pulled out her phone and showed him a text message. "Pierce has been trying to reach out through intermediaries. He wants to discuss terms with you." She made air quotes with her fingers. "We set up a meeting. Make him think you're willing to stay quiet for the right price." "And then what?" "Then we get him to incriminate himself. I'll be nearby with recording equipment. Once we have him on tape admitting to the corruption and making threats, we can end this." Jackson stood and walked to the window, watching the afternoon sun cast shadows across his front yard. The same yard where Emily had learned to ride her bike, where they'd built snowmen in winter. "If anything goes wrong, it won't," Alvarez assured him. "I've arranged for Pastor Hayes and his wife to take Emily for the night. They have a spare room, and his grandson is about her age. She'll be safe there." The mention of the pastor brought a small measure of comfort. William Hayes had been a rock through this whole ordeal, offering wisdom and support when others had turned away. Jackson nodded slowly. "Okay, set it up." The next hour was a flurry of activity. Alvarez made calls, arranging the meeting with Pierce for that evening in the parking garage of an old shopping center on the edge of town. Jackson packed Emily's overnight bag, making sure to include Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat she couldn't sleep without. When Emily came home from school, Jackson sat her down on the couch. "Hey, sweetie, how would you like to have a sleepover at Pastor Hayes' house tonight?" Emily's eyes lit up for a moment, then dimmed with concern. "Is this because of the bad people, Daddy?" His heart clenched. She was too perceptive sometimes, too aware of the adult world that had invaded their peaceful life. "It's just for one night. Think of it as an adventure. I heard Tommy Hayes just got a new video game system." She studied his face with those serious eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. "You're going to do something dangerous, aren't you?" Jackson pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm going to do something important. Something to make sure we're safe and can get back to our normal life. Like when you were a soldier? Something like that. But I promise I'll be careful, and Agent Alvarez will be with me." Emily brightened at that. "I like her. She's brave. Like you." A knock at the door announced Pastor Hayes' arrival. Jackson helped Emily gather her things, triple-checking that Mr. Whiskers was safely tucked in her backpack. At the pastor's car, Jackson knelt down to Emily's level. "I'll pick you up first thing in the morning, okay? We'll get pancakes at the diner. Promise?" "Cross my heart." He pulled her close one more time, trying to pour all his love into the embrace. "I love you more than anything in this world, Emily Cole." "I love you too, Daddy." She hesitated, then whispered, "Be brave." Jackson watched until the car disappeared around the corner, then returned inside to prepare. Alvarez had brought a wire for him to wear, carefully concealed under his jacket. They spent an hour going over the plan, rehearsing different scenarios, making sure Jackson knew exactly what to say to draw out Pierce's confession. As dusk settled over the town, Jackson drove to the meeting location. The parking garage was a concrete ghost town, with only a few scattered cars on the lower levels. He parked on the second floor, as arranged, and checked his watch. 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. Alvarez's voice came through his earpiece, barely above a whisper. "I'm in position on the third floor, overlooking your location. 2 other agents are on the ground level. If anything feels wrong, give the signal, and we'll move in." Jackson touched his tie, their agreed-upon signal, more to reassure himself it was there than to practice. The garage was silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the occasional echo of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. He thought of Emily, probably playing video games with Tommy Hayes right now, safe and unaware of what was about to unfold. He thought of his late wife, wondering what she would think of all this. Most of all, he thought about Pierce, the man who had betrayed not just him, but everything their company was supposed to stand for. The sound of tires on concrete broke through his thoughts. Headlights swept across the walls as a black SUV approached, moving slowly through the shadows. Jackson stood straighter, squaring his shoulders the way he used to before missions. This wasn't the battlefield, but in many ways it felt just as important. The SUV came to a stop about 30 feet away, its headlights illuminating Jackson in a harsh glare that made it impossible to see who was inside. He heard car doors opening and closing, followed by footsteps. Through his earpiece, Alvarez whispered, "Remember, stay calm." Let him do the talking at first. We need him to incriminate himself. Jackson touched his tie once in acknowledgement, then watched as 2 figures emerged from the glare of the headlights. Pierce was immediately recognizable, his expensive suit and confident stride unchanged from their years working together. The second man was larger, clearly there for muscle rather than conversation. "Jackson," Pierce called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I'm so glad you decided to be reasonable about this." The parking garage's dim fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Jackson's footsteps echoed as he walked to the designated meeting spot on level 3. His heart hammered against his ribs, but years of military training helped him maintain a steady expression. The wire beneath his shirt felt scratchy against his skin. A sleek black Mercedes purred into view, its headlights briefly blinding Jackson. Randall Pierce stepped out, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Jackson's salary. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and a confident smile played across his face. "Jackson!" Pierce called out, spreading his arms wide as if greeting an old friend. "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this." Jackson forced himself to stay still as Pierce approached. He thought of Emily's words about courage and took a deep breath. "I just want to protect my daughter," he said, letting his genuine fear for Emily color his voice. Of course. Pierce reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Sometimes the smartest thing a man can do is know when to stay quiet." He held out the envelope. "Consider this a severance package. Much better than what the board originally offered." Jackson took the envelope with slightly trembling hands, not entirely an act. "How much?" "50,000. Cash." Pierce's smile widened. "Just a small token of appreciation for your years of loyal service, and your continued discretion about certain contractual matters." Jackson thumbed through the bills, then looked up. "The defense contracts you pushed through, the ones that bypassed normal security protocols." Pierce's eyes glittered. "Exactly. You're a smart man, Jackson. You understand how business works. Sometimes corners need to be cut to stay competitive. Like selling security clearances to shell companies?" Jackson's voice remained carefully neutral. The world isn't black and white, my friend. Pierce stepped closer, lowering his voice. Those contracts kept the company profitable. Everyone benefited. The board members, the shareholders, even you, with your comfortable salary and benefits. Until you fired me, Pierce shrugged. Unfortunately, you were getting too attentive, starting to ask questions about procedures, documentation. We couldn't risk you becoming a problem. His smile turned cold. But now you can have a fresh start. Take the money. Move somewhere nice with your daughter. Forget everything you think you know about those contracts. Jackson held the envelope tight. And if I don't? The change in Pierce's demeanor was instant. The friendly mask dropped, replaced by something hard and dangerous. Then I'd hate to see something unfortunate happen to that sweet little girl of yours. His hand slipped inside his jacket. You're not the only one who knows how to make problems disappear. The gun appeared so quickly Jackson barely had time to react. The black metal gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Pierce aimed it at his chest. Did you really think I wouldn't come prepared? Pierce sneered. Drop the envelope. Slowly, Jackson raised his hands, the envelope falling to the concrete with a soft thud. You won't get away with this. I already have. Pierce's finger tightened on the trigger. For 12 years I've been running this operation. Do you know how many people have tried to expose me? Do you know what happened to them? Tell me more about that operation, Jackson said clearly, knowing the wire was picking up every word. Pierce laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the garage. You want a confession? Fine. I sold clearances to the highest bidders. I faked security reviews. I made millions while fools like you did the real work for pennies. And now? Federal agents, drop your weapon. Agent Alvarez's voice rang out as she and 4 other agents emerged from their hiding spots, guns drawn. Pierce's head whipped around, his face contorting with rage as he saw the red and blue lights now flashing at both garage exits. It's over, Pierce, Alvarez called. Drop the gun and put your hands where we can see them. For one terrible moment, Jackson thought Pierce might actually pull the trigger. The man's face had gone purple with fury, his hand shaking as he kept the gun trained on Jackson's chest. You set me up, Pierce snarled. You pathetic, self-righteous. Last warning, Alvarez barked. Drop it. Time seemed to stretch like taffy. Jackson could hear his own heartbeat, could feel sweat rolling down his back. Then, finally, Pierce's shoulders slumped. The gun clattered to the ground. 2 agents rushed forward, forcing Pierce to his knees. As they cuffed him, Jackson noticed movement by the garage entrance. News vans had arrived, cameras rolling as Pierce was led away in handcuffs. This isn't over, Pierce shouted, twisting in the agent's grip to glare at Jackson. You hear me, Cole? You're going to regret this. You and your precious daughter. Add threatening a witness to the charges, Alvarez called out, her voice carrying clearly in the garage. She stepped up beside Jackson, a satisfied smile on her face. Along with attempted murder, corruption, fraud, and endangering national security. Did I miss anything? Pierce's stream of curses echoed off the concrete walls as the agents pushed him toward a waiting vehicle. Camera flashes lit up the scene like lightning, capturing his disheveled appearance and contorted face for tomorrow's headlines. Jackson watched them load Pierce into the car, his legs suddenly feeling weak with relief. It was over. Emily was safe. The truth was out. You did good, Alvarez said quietly beside him. Your daughter's going to be proud. Jackson nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Through the garage entrance, he could see reporters gathering, their cameras capturing Pierce's downfall for the whole world to see. The man who had threatened his daughter, destroyed his reputation, and nearly ruined his life was finally facing justice. Pierce's final shouts of, "You'll pay for this, Cole!" faded as the car door slammed shut, and the vehicle pulled away into the night, leaving behind only the flashing lights of news cameras and the sweet taste of Vindication. Jackson sat in his living room, staring at the TV screen in disbelief. The morning news showed footage from last night, Randall Pierce being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his normally perfect hair disheveled. The headline beneath read, "Corporate Corruption Exposed. Local Hero Helps Federal Agents Uncover Scandal." Dad, we're on TV again. Emily bounced on the couch next to him, her eyes wide with excitement. The news anchor was recounting how Jackson Cole, a decorated veteran and former security manager, had worked with federal authorities to expose corruption at the highest levels of the company. His phone buzzed constantly with text messages and calls from neighbors, old colleagues, and friends. The same people who had avoided him weeks ago now wanted to congratulate him. Jackson felt a mix of vindication and exhaustion wash over him. "Look, they're showing Agent Alvarez." Emily pointed at the screen where Maria stood at a podium, addressing reporters. "Mr. Cole's cooperation was instrumental in this investigation," Alvarez was saying, her professional demeanor masking any hint of their shared tension from the night before. His integrity and courage in the face of threats helped bring this corruption to light. Emily hugged his arm. "She called you courageous, Dad." Jackson smiled, running his hand over his daughter's hair. "Time to get ready for church, sweetie." The drive to church felt different that morning. People waved from their yards, and cars honked friendly greetings. Emily sat taller in her seat, proud of her father's newfound recognition. As they walked up the church steps, Mrs. Henderson, Emily's Sunday school teacher, rushed to meet them.
"Jackson, Emily, we've all been praying for you."
She wrapped them both in a warm hug. "When we saw the news last night." The church foyer was buzzing with excitement. People who had kept their distance now pressed close, offering handshakes and words of support. Jackson noticed some sheepish looks from those who had doubted him, but there was no time for awkwardness as they were ushered into the sanctuary. Pastor Mike stood at the pulpit, his kind face beaming as he spotted Jackson and Emily finding their usual spot in the middle pews. "This morning," he began, "we have something special to celebrate. We've witnessed how faith, courage, and truth can triumph over darkness." The pastor recounted the events of the past weeks, Jackson's unfair dismissal, the federal investigation, the threats, and finally, the exposure of corruption. "But more than that," Pastor Mike continued, "we've seen a man stand firm in his faith, protect his daughter, and choose what's right over what's easy. Would Jackson Cole please stand?" Jackson felt Emily's small hand squeeze his as he rose. The congregation erupted in applause, people standing one by one until the entire church was on their feet. Emily jumped up beside him, her face glowing with pride. "That's my dad," she announced loudly, causing ripples of warm laughter through the church. Jackson felt moisture in his eyes as he looked around at the familiar faces, the veterans who had started the fundraiser, the neighbors who had brought meals, the teachers who had protected Emily from bullying. Even those who had doubted now stood in support, their faces showing genuine admiration. After the service, people lingered longer than usual, sharing coffee and donuts in the fellowship hall. Emily was surrounded by her Sunday school friends, animatedly describing how her dad had helped catch the bad guys. Jackson stood by the coffee table, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about what would happen next. He noticed Agent Alvarez slip quietly into the hall, dressed casually instead of her usual suit. She waited patiently until the crowd around Jackson thinned before approaching. "Quite a different scene from a few weeks ago," she said with a small smile. Jackson nodded, grateful for her steady presence through it all. "I couldn't have done it without your help, Agent Alvarez." "Maria," she corrected gently. "I think we're past formalities." She glanced around the room, noting the warmth and community spirit. "You know, Jackson, I've been thinking about your next steps." "Honestly, I haven't had much time to think beyond yesterday," he admitted. Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "I've watched you these past weeks. How you handle pressure, how you lead by example, how you bring out the best in others." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You have a gift for leadership, Jackson, the kind that's built on integrity and service. You should use it for something greater." Before Jackson could respond, Emily appeared at his side, cookie in hand. "Agent Maria, did you see us on TV? Dad's a hero now, just like I always knew he was." Maria smiled warmly at Emily. "Your dad was always a hero, sweetheart. Now everyone else knows it too." The autumn sun cast long shadows through the windows of Jackson Cole's office at the Veterans Support Center. 3 weeks had passed since Pierce's arrest, and life had taken an unexpected but welcome turn. The small office wasn't fancy, just a desk, 2 chairs, and walls decorated with military service photographs. But to Jackson, it represented something profound, a fresh start. He adjusted the nameplate on his desk that read, "Jackson Cole, Veterans Community Liaison," and smiled, remembering the call that had changed everything. Maria Alvarez had contacted him about a new federal initiative to help veterans reintegrate into civilian life. "We need someone who understands both worlds," she'd said. "Someone with integrity and compassion." The door creaked open, and Tommy Martinez, a young veteran still adjusting to civilian life, stepped in.
Mr. Cole, got a minute?
Always, Jackson replied, gesturing to the chair.
And please, it's Jackson.
Tommy sat down, his hands fidgeting slightly.
I've been having trouble with the job applications you helped me with. My hands.
They shake sometimes. Makes it hard to type. Jackson nodded, understanding.
Let's work through this together.
I know a few tricks that might help. He remembered his own struggles after returning from service, how small tasks could sometimes feel overwhelming. As they talked, Jackson heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Emily burst in, backpack still on, her face glowing.
Dad, I got an A on my history project.
Tommy smiled at the interruption, watching as Emily proudly showed her father the paper covered in gold stars. Jackson had arranged his schedule so he could pick Emily up from school most days, and the center had even set up a small study corner in his office where she could do homework.
That's amazing, sweetie,
Jackson beamed, giving her a quick hug.
Why don't you sit up at your desk while I finish up with Mr. Martinez?
Emily nodded, already pulling out her books. The center's director had been surprisingly accommodating about Emily's presence, understanding that being a single dad meant sometimes bringing work and family together. After finishing with Tommy, Jackson watched his daughter working diligently at her little desk by the window. Their life had found a new rhythm. Mornings meant breakfast together, then school for Emily while Jackson headed to the center. Afternoons were filled with homework, counseling sessions with veterans, and sometimes visits from Maria, who'd become a regular presence in their lives. Later that evening, Jackson pulled into their driveway. The house looked different now. Flowers bloomed in the garden where Emily had insisted on planting happy colors, and a fresh coat of paint brightened the exterior. Small changes, but they represented their new beginning. Inside, Jackson started dinner while Emily set the table, another routine they'd perfected. The kitchen filled with the aroma of cooking pasta and the sound of Emily chattering about her day. Katie asked if I could sleep over on Friday, Emily said, carefully placing forks beside the plates. Her mom said she'd call you. We'll see, Jackson replied, stirring the sauce. How about you finish your math homework first? Emily groaned, but nodded, knowing the drill. Structure and responsibility. Lessons Jackson had learned in the military that now helped shape their home life. As they sat down to eat, Emily twirled spaghetti around her fork, suddenly thoughtful. Dad? Yes, sweetheart. Remember when those mean people were saying bad things about you? Jackson paused, fork midway to his mouth. I do, but you didn't give up. You kept doing the right thing, even when it was scary. She looked at him with those wise eyes that sometimes made his heart ache with how much they reminded him of her mother's. Mom would be proud of you, Daddy. Jackson felt his eyes grow wet, and he had to set down his fork. The simple truth in her words hit him hard. Sarah would have been proud, not just of him standing up to corruption, but of how he'd kept their little family together, how he'd found a way to turn hardship into something meaningful. You're right, baby, he managed, wiping his eyes. Mom would be proud of both of us. Through the window, the evening sun painted the kitchen in warm golden light, and Jackson smiled, knowing they had finally found their way home. The late morning sun bathed the community center's front lawn in golden light. Rows of white folding chairs stretched across the grass, filled with veterans in their service caps, families clutching programs, and townsfolk who'd come to support the new Veteran Support Initiative. A podium stood on a small stage, draped with red, white, and blue bunting that fluttered in the gentle breeze. Jackson Cole stood behind the stage, his hands trembling slightly as he reviewed his notes. He smoothed down his navy suit jacket, the same one he'd worn to his last job interview, now fitting better thanks to regular morning runs with Emily. His daughter had insisted on helping him pick out his tie this morning. A deep blue one, she said, matched his eyes. Daddy! Emily's voice caught his attention. She peeked around the corner of the stage, her sundress swishing. Everyone's here. Even Mrs. Thompson from the diner brought cookies. Jackson knelt down to her level, straightening the ribbon in her hair. Are you nervous for your old dad? Nope. Emily's eyes sparkled. You're going to be great. Just like when you used to give orders in the army, right? This is a little different, sweetheart. He chuckled, but her confidence warmed his heart. 5 minutes, Mr. Cole, the event coordinator called out. Emily gave him a quick hug and scampered to her front row seat. Jackson watched her go, remembering those dark days just months ago when he'd feared losing everything. Now, here he was, about to lead a program that would help others find their way back from similar struggles. From his position, He could see Maria Alvarez settling into her seat a few rows back. She'd traded her usual Secret Service attire for a simple blue dress, her badge nowhere in sight. When she caught his eye, she gave him a warm smile and a subtle thumbs up. Their weekly planning meetings had grown increasingly personal lately, conversations extending beyond work to shared stories of service and family. The mayor stepped up to the podium, beginning her introduction. Jackson took a deep breath, remembering Emily's words from that crucial night. Courage means doing the right thing, even when you're scared. And now, I'm honored to introduce Jackson Cole, our new Veterans Community Liaison. Applause rippled through the crowd as Jackson stepped onto the stage. Emily bounced in her seat, beaming. He placed his notes on the podium but found himself looking past them, into the faces of people who'd been both judge and supporter through his journey. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "A few months ago, I stood in my kitchen, staring at bills I couldn't pay and wondering if I'd failed as a father." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'd lost my job. My reputation was under attack. And for the first time since coming home from combat, I felt truly lost." In the audience, he saw heads nodding, veterans who understood that particular kind of darkness. "But what I discovered through that trial wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about remembering who we are as a community." His eyes met Maria's briefly. It was about finding the courage to stand up for truth, even when easier paths presented themselves. Jackson shared the story of his journey, the initial shock of losing his job, the federal investigation, the community's support, and then rejection, and finally, the truth that set him free. He spoke about faith tested and restored, about the strength found in a child's unwavering belief in her father. "Today, we're launching more than just a support program," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "We're creating a bridge between two worlds that often feel miles apart: military service and civilian life. Every veteran here knows the challenge of that transition. Every family member knows the weight of watching someone they love struggle to find their place again." Emily sat up straighter, her eyes never leaving her father's face. "But here's what I've learned. Sometimes our greatest setbacks lead us to our true calling. Sometimes losing everything helps us find exactly where we're meant to be." Jackson gestured to the building behind him. "This center will be more than just an office. It will be a place of understanding, of second chances, of hope." As he outlined the program's practical aspects, job training, counseling services, family support, he noticed Maria dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a promise of possibilities yet to unfold. Jackson concluded by addressing the veterans directly. "You carried the flag for our country. Now let us help carry you through this next chapter, because no one who served should ever feel alone in the fight to come home." The applause was immediate and thunderous. Emily jumped up, clapping and cheering. Veterans stood, some saluting, others nodding with understanding. The mayor returned to the podium to handle the ceremonial ribbon cutting, but Jackson's attention was on his daughter's radiant face. As the ceremony concluded and people began mingling over coffee and Mrs. Thompson's cookies, Jackson made his way down to Emily. She threw herself into his arms, and he lifted her up, just like when she was smaller. "That was amazing, Daddy," she exclaimed. "Did you see everyone crying happy tears?" "I saw you in the front row," he said, setting her down. "That's all I needed to see." They walked hand in hand toward the sunlight, streaming through the community center's doors. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of new beginnings. "We're going to be just fine," Jackson whispered, squeezing her hand. Emily looked up at him, her face glowing with pride. "More than fine, Daddy. We're heroes now." What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jackson Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.